What if the man behind one of Hollywood's most iconic heroes was carrying a heartbreak no one ever saw? Pierce Brosnan isn't just a suave James Bond we know and love. He's a man shaped by lost silence and a grief that never truly left him. Tragedy struck when he lost the love of his life, but that was only the beginning. Fate dealt him another devastating blow, one that echoed the first in the most painful way possible. Today, we're diving deep into Pierce Brosnan's silent grief, the untold story of love, loss, and the quiet strength it takes to keep moving forward when your world falls apart. Stick around. What you're about to hear isn't just a story of tragedy. It's a story of resilience you won't forget. Pierce Brosnan was just another rising actor trying to find his place in a competitive industry. He was young, ambitious, and driven, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment he met Cassandra Harris. She wasn't just beautiful. She had a presence that completely stopped him in his tracks. Pierce would later say he was instantly struck by her elegance and warmth, never imagining that this woman would one day become the center of his world. Cassandra wasn't new to the world of film and fame. An accomplished actress with a past marriage, she was already raising 2 children, Charlotte and Christopher. When Pierce stepped into her life, he didn't just fall in love with her. He stepped into the role of a father, something he had never experienced before. But it didn't feel forced or complicated. It felt natural, like something that was meant to be. They'd built a life together in London, surrounded by the energy of the city and the love of a blended family. Their bond was strong, and their shared love for the arts brought them even closer. Just a few years later, in 1980, Pierce and Cassandra got married, sealing their connection in front of family and friends. It wasn't long before they welcomed a son of their own, Sean, adding to the joy of their growing family. But Pierce didn't just settle into the role of stepfather. He embraced it. After the children's biological father passed away, he formally adopted Charlotte and Christopher. They took his name not just as a legal step, but as a symbol of the family they had become. It was a quiet but powerful act of love and commitment. Cassandra continued her acting career, appearing in several notable roles, including a part in a James Bond film. During that time, she introduced Pierce to people in the Bond circle, a twist of fate that would later lead to a role that made him a global icon. But at that point, it was just another moment in their intertwined lives, a shared experience between 2 actors navigating the unpredictable world of show business. Beyond their careers, it was the strength of their partnership that stood out. Cassandra believed in Pierce completely. She saw his potential long before the world did. Her faith in him gave him confidence, and her love gave him stability. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, quiet strength, and an unshakable bond. It was a love story few people get to live, full of devotion, joy, and the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. But just as their family seemed perfectly whole, life had other plans. And what came next would test Pierce in ways no one could have imagined. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Pierce Brosnan's career was finally gaining momentum. His family was growing stronger than ever, and the future looked bright. But in the midst of this happiness, life delivered a blow that would shake the very foundation of everything he had built. Cassandra began feeling unwell, subtle at first, almost easy to dismiss. A little fatigue, some aches, a sense that something just wasn't quite right. At first, they thought it was stress or exhaustion, common enough for someone balancing motherhood and a career. But the symptoms didn't go away. They worsened, and after a series of tests, came a diagnosis that felt like a punch to the gut: ovarian cancer. It wasn't just terrifying, it was personal. Cassandra's own mother had passed away from the same illness years earlier. The pattern was impossible to ignore, and suddenly, the future they had dreamed of felt like it was slipping away. Pierce, who had always been a rock for his family, now found himself in a position where no amount of strength or optimism could fix what was happening. But he didn't run. He didn't break down. He stayed. He became Cassandra's fiercest protector, her emotional anchor, and her constant companion. Every doctor's visit, every painful treatment, he was there. Their home turned from a place of laughter into a quiet battleground. The kids, though still young, could sense the change. The energy had shifted. The smiles came less often, and the fear lingered in every corner. Cassandra, always poised and strong, refused to give in easily. She fought with grace and determination, never once asking, "Why me?" She didn't want pity. What she wanted was time. Time with her children, time with her husband, time to live. And Pierce did everything he could to give that to her. He put roles on hold. He stepped back from work. Hollywood could wait. Cassandra couldn't. Behind the scenes, their once vibrant life slowed to a painful crawl. Conversations became more emotional, more urgent. Plans were whispered quietly, not for the distant future, but for the days and weeks ahead. For Pierce, every moment became something to be treasured, because he never knew which one might be the last. And through all of it, he kept up appearances. He smiled for the cameras, walked red carpets when needed, but behind closed doors, he was watching the love of his life fade, day by day, breath by breath. But as the illness progressed, there was one thing that never left: their bond. Cassandra's strength only deepened Pierce's love for her. She wasn't just his wife. She was his hero. He once said, "She had the strength that I wouldn't be able to live without." And as she grew weaker, his own strength quietly took over. But the battle was already tilting in the wrong direction. And soon, Pierce would be forced to face the one thing he couldn't fight off, the one thing he couldn't protect her from. What came next would leave a scar so deep, it would follow him for the rest of his life. As the months dragged on, the quiet war in the Brosnan home became heavier. Treatments weren't working the way everyone had hoped. The sparkle in Cassandra's eyes, the one that had captivated Pierce the first time they met, began to dim. Her voice grew softer, her body weaker. But still, she smiled when she could. Still, she asked about the kids, about his day, pretending, if only for a moment, that things were normal. But they weren't. Pierce could see it. Each day felt like a quiet countdown, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He tried to hold on to the routine, making her tea, sitting by her side, brushing her hair when she was too tired to lift a hand. These small acts became sacred, and in those moments, the world outside no longer mattered. The noise of Hollywood, the flashing cameras, the scripts waiting on his desk, it all faded away. Then came the day no one wants to face. A day that Pierce had been dreading from the very first diagnosis. Cassandra passed away in December of 1991. She was only 43. Just like that, the center of his world was gone. The silence that followed was louder than anything he'd ever experienced. The house, once filled with music and laughter, fell hollow. The woman who had believed in him before anyone else, who stood by him through his toughest years, was no longer there to lean on. And suddenly, he wasn't just a grieving husband. He was a single father, left to guide 3 children through a heartbreak they didn't fully understand. In the public eye, Pierce remained composed. He smiled, gave polite nods, and quietly thanked those who offered condolences. But behind closed doors, he was unraveling. He admitted later that the grief didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly like a shadow. One day it was sadness, the next anger, then guilt, and then nothing, just numbness. What made it even harder was the way Cassandra's absence continued to echo through his life. He'd catch glimpses of her in the children's faces. He'd hear her laugh in his dreams, only to wake up alone. Time didn't make the pain disappear. It only changed the shape of it. The world saw Pierce Brosnan as a suave, unshakable man who would later become James Bond. But in reality, he was carrying a silent grief, a heartbreak that never fully healed. He threw himself into his work, not to escape, but to survive. Acting became a form of therapy, a way to channel the emotions he couldn't say out loud. And while the cameras captured the charm and the wit, what they didn't see was a man who cried quietly when no one was watching. The man who still whispered her name when the world was asleep. But as he tried to rebuild, life was far from done testing him. Because what happened years later would reopen old wounds and prove that heartbreak wasn't finished with him yet. Just when Pierce Brosnan had started to rebuild his life, when the world thought he had moved on from heartbreak, tragedy came knocking again. And this time, it wasn't just devastating, it was eerily familiar. Charlotte, Cassandra's daughter from a previous relationship, was someone Pierce had raised as his own. He adopted her without hesitation, loved her unconditionally, and treated her no differently than his biological children. She had grown up calling him dad, relying on him for guidance and support after losing her mother so young. And even in the years following Cassandra's passing, Pierce stayed close, remaining a steady force in her life. But fate had something cruel in store. Charlotte began feeling unwell. It started the same way it had with her mother. Subtle signs that didn't scream danger first. But just like before, the symptoms progressed. And when the diagnosis came in, Pierce was left staring down the same monster he'd fought decades earlier: ovarian cancer. Again, it was almost too much to process. The same disease that had taken the love of his life had now come for her daughter. It felt like a twisted, nightmarish déjà vu, one that shattered whatever sense of peace he'd managed to build over the years. Charlotte was only in her early 40s. She had 2 young children of her own. She had dreams, a family, a life. And now, she too was fighting for survival. Once again, Pierce found himself pacing hospital halls, holding trembling hands, pretending to be strong when he felt like falling apart inside. He later described it as losing Cassandra all over again. The grief resurfaced with brutal force. This time, he wasn't just mourning a daughter. He was mourning the cruel cycle that kept repeating. The helplessness, the rage, the numbness all came flooding back. In 2013, Charlotte passed away. Just like her mother, the same disease, the same painful end. And for Pierce, it was another gaping wound that reopened everything he thought he had buried. He kept his composure for the world. But those close to him knew he was devastated. Behind the red carpet appearances and warm smiles, there was a man who had now lost 2 of the most important women in his life to the same silent killer. 2 funerals, 2 heartbreaks, 1 endless ache. He spoke rarely about Charlotte's passing, not because he didn't care, but because the pain was just too raw, too unfair, too overwhelming. He honored her quietly, privately, not with grand gestures, but with memories, with the lessons he passed on to his children, and with the fierce love he continued to carry for her. And though the world celebrated his success, Pierce Brosnan carried a secret truth. Behind every achievement, behind every movie, was a man shaped by unimaginable loss. A man whose heart had been broken, twice, by the same cruel twist of fate. But even after all that, his story wasn't over. Because the way Pierce chose to carry that grief would show a kind of strength the cameras never captured. After Charlotte's death, Pierce Brosnan found himself staring into a familiar abyss. He had walked this road before, years earlier when Cassandra slipped away, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't just the loss of a daughter. It was a haunting realization that life could still find ways to break him, even after all the pain he thought he'd already survived. Most people would crumble under the weight of one such loss. Pierce had now endured it twice. But instead of letting it destroy him, he did something far more difficult. He learned to live with the pain, not to erase it, not to push it down, but to carry it day by day and still find a reason to keep going. Work became his refuge, not as an escape, but as a form of therapy. He poured himself into his roles, channeled his emotions into his characters, and found a strange comfort in the controlled chaos of a movie set. Behind every scene, there was a man drawing from something real, something raw. His performances weren't just acting anymore. They were survival. But even more important than his career was his family. He knew what grief could do if left unchecked. He had watched it steal moments, fracture connections, and turn time into a blur. So he made a choice to show up for his kids, to be present, and to ensure that love never got lost in the aftermath of pain. In many ways, Pierce became the anchor his family needed. He leaned into fatherhood like never before. Long walks, deep conversations, moments of silence where nothing needed to be said, just felt the same way Cassandra had once held him together. He now did for his children. And then came the surprising twist in his story. He found love again. Killy Shea Smith entered his life like a quiet sunrise. She wasn't a replacement for Cassandra or a distraction from grief. She was something new, someone who brought warmth back into a heart that had forgotten how to feel light. With Killy, Pierce found laughter again, stability, and eventually a second chance at building something beautiful. Still, he never forgot Cassandra or Charlotte. To this day, he keeps their memory alive, not in headlines or tributes, but in small, sacred ways. A photo by his bedside, a quiet toast on their birthdays, a look in his eyes during interviews that says more than words ever could. His grief never left him. It became a part of him, not a weakness, but a quiet strength. And in a world that often expects men to bury their pain, Pierce Brosnan stands as proof that real courage is found in facing it, in carrying it, in letting it shape you, but never define you. But even with the love he found and the healing he worked so hard for, Pierce's life had one more surprise in store, an ending he never saw coming, one that would finally bring his story full circle. To the outside world, Pierce Brosnan is the ultimate picture of charm, suave, successful, the kind of man who seems untouched by the struggles that weigh down ordinary lives. But behind that effortless smile is a story soaked in heartbreak, a quiet war waged in the shadows, and a strength most people never see. He never made his pain a headline. He never chased sympathy. In fact, much of his grief unfolded in silence, away from cameras, away from press. And that's what makes it even more powerful. Because Pierce Brosnan didn't need to speak about his pain to prove he had it. You could see it in the way he carried himself, in the way he looked at his children, in the way he talked about love, with reverence, with fragility. There's something haunting about the fact that both Cassandra and Charlotte were taken by the same illness. Something cruel about the idea that lightning could strike the same family twice. But Pierce never let that darkness define him. He never let bitterness take root. Instead, he transformed grief into depth, loss into empathy, tragedy into tenderness. His roles in film reflect that evolution. Over time, you can sense a weight in performances that wasn't always there before. A subtle emotional depth behind the eyes. A sense that the man you're watching on screen knows what it means to lose everything and still keep going. But perhaps what's most striking about Pierce Brosnan's story is what it teaches us about love. Real love, the kind that doesn't die when someone's gone. The kind that keeps showing up year after year, long after the world has moved on. He loved Cassandra until the very end and beyond it. He stood by Charlotte through her final moments, and he honored them both not through grand gestures, but through quiet remembrance, private grief, and a life lived with heart. And still, he loved again. That, in itself, is a kind of bravery people rarely talk about. To open your heart again after it's been shattered. To allow yourself joy after unthinkable pain. To carry love and loss at the same time and never let one cancel out the other. Pierce Brosnan's story isn't just about fame or movies or tragedy. It's about what happens when life strips you down to nothing and you choose to rebuild anyway. It's about what it means to endure. And in that endurance, there's a kind of beauty that doesn't make the headlines. A kind of heroism that doesn't get awards. Just a man carrying his silent grief and choosing every day to keep walking forward. After losing both Cassandra and Charlotte, Pierce Brosnan could have easily shut the world out. For many, grief that deep becomes a wall, a barrier that keeps love and light from ever getting back in. But somehow, despite all the pain, Pierce allowed himself one more chance to feel again. And that chance came in the form of Keely Shea Smith. They met in 1994, at a time when Pierce was still piecing his life back together. The wounds of Cassandra's passing hadn't fully healed. His heart was guarded. But Keely wasn't trying to fill a void. She simply showed up patient and steady. And over time, her presence became something Pierce didn't know he needed: peace. What started as a quiet connection grew into something deep, something real. Keely didn't try to erase the past. She honored it. She supported Pierce as he grieved, stood by him as he raised his children, and never once asked him to let go of the love he had lost. That kind of compassion is rare, and it's exactly what made their bond unshakable. In 2001, the two married in a beautiful ceremony in Ireland. It wasn't a flashy Hollywood event. It was personal, meaningful, a symbol of second chances. Since then, their love has stood the test of time. They've raised two sons together, navigated fame, heartbreak, and healing, all while keeping their connection grounded and real. What's remarkable about Keely is that she's never tried to step into the spotlight. She doesn't dominate headlines or chase attention. She's just been there, behind the scenes, by Pierce's side, holding space for his pain and celebrating his joys. And for a man who's carried so much grief, that kind of love isn't just comforting, it's transformative. Pierce often speaks about her with quiet admiration. He calls her his North Star, his rock. And if you look at photos of them over the years, the affection is undeniable. You see it in the way they hold hands, the way they smile at each other, not just like lovers, but like partners who weather the storm together. Keely didn't replace Cassandra. She didn't erase the past. She simply became part of a new chapter, one where Pierce could finally breathe again, one where love didn't have to hurt. And in a world that often moves too fast and forgets too easily, theirs is a love story that reminds us of something simple but powerful, that healing is possible, that life can begin again, and that even the deepest scars can become part of something beautiful. Thanks for watching and learning about Pierce Brosnan's incredible journey through grief and resilience. Please give it a like and subscribe for more. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.